Welcome back. In the last video, you watched me installing the MHR Big Bore exhaust onto the 86cc. Now it's time to see if I can get it in tune. I want to get some exhaust sound clips and to find out what kind of performance changes there are with the MHR exhaust, the Malossi exhaust, versus the piece pipe that was on there. So to get started, I'm not sure that it's necessary, but I'm going to go ahead and upjet the carburetor by about roughly 5%. There's a 105 main jet in there right now, and I'm going to move that up to a 110. I don't know that I need that because I already had a tuned exhaust on here, but just to be safe, I'm going to move that up. Most likely, I'm going to have to use lighter roller weights or sliders in my variator because the piece pipe like to rev out 10 to 11,000 RPM, and from what I hear, this is probably going to be something like 12 to 13,000 RPM. But for right now, I'm going to leave the CVT alone, and I'm just going to upjet to a 110 main jet. Now that I've got a little bit of a margin for safety with a richer main jet, I'm going to go out and get you some sound clips, and then I'm going to take it down the road and see how it's doing. The first ride didn't go too bad, but it's definitely not in tune. To me, it feels like it's running fat. I don't think I needed to up that main jet, so I'm going to go back from the 110 to the 105 that I had in there in the first place with a piece pipe. I also think it's definitely going to need lighter sliders in the variator, but for now I just want to see how much difference it makes putting the smaller main jet in there and work one thing at a time so I know what's happening. Since it's been through a heat cycle, I'm going to go ahead and check all the fasteners on the exhaust to make sure they didn't loosen up. But I also wanted to show you real quick that this pipe has already changed colors. My first ride there was 3.1 miles, and you can see the header is definitely a lot different color than it was before. And by the time you get back here to the second stage diffuser and the belly, doesn't look bad. And then the stinger has also changed color already. Not really a big deal, that's kind of what happens, but I didn't think it would happen within 3 miles. That went much better with a 105 main jet. It felt a whole lot cleaner, and it actually would pull, and I could hold the throttle open without it feeling like it was bogging down after holding it for a few. So I could feel more power when I was taking off. It got up to, I think, about 62 miles per hour when I was just sitting up going down the road, probably with a little bit of a tailwind behind me. So overall, it didn't feel bad, but I noticed when I tried to take off that the RPM dropped below 10,000, and once the RPM dropped below 10,000, I could actually feel that it was weaker. And I definitely think this thing would be happier at a little higher RPM, so right now what I'm going to do is remove the variator and go ahead and swap the weights out for something a little lighter. So I had a mix of 9 gram and 7 gram weights in here for 8 grams on average, and I just took out my little weights from inside of the weights, the add-on weights that I made here out of aluminum, and that takes them all back down to 7 grams, so I'm going from 8 grams to 7 grams. switching from 8 gram to 7 gram sliders was a definite improvement. It feels more snappy, and it moved to about 11,500 RPM for wide open throttle acceleration. The max RPM it said was 11,930, but all of my max RPM so far that my Trail Tech gauge is showing seem to be a sort of flash RPM. It's not actually where it's hanging out. So before it was around 10 to 11,000, now it's about 11,500 RPM. And I'm thinking it might like still lighter roller weights or slider weights, but unfortunately I don't have anything around, so I'm gonna have to call this off for right now and order some weights. Let me give you another look at the exhaust. You can see my header now is really deep brown, and the sort of brown or tan coloration has moved across most of the exhaust. I can even get a hint of it here in the belly. No big deal, like I said before, I guess that's just what happens. Anyway, before I put it up, I'm kind of new to these race pipes, these expensive pipes. So I guess I'm just going to spray a rag down with a little bit of WD-40 and wipe over it. I don't know if that's something it really needs right now. Sorry, Harleys are everywhere around here today because it's warm. Anyway, I don't know if that's something it really needs at this point, because hopefully the clear coat is still in good condition. But I figure it can't hurt. And I know a lot of the other guys seem to be adamant about making sure they wipe their pipes down when they put them away. So if you've got a pipe routine, something for treating your pipe after your ride, go ahead and share it in the comments with me. So far, the stuff I've heard is basically wipe it down with WD-40, treat it with Mop and Glow every now and then, and some people will just wipe two-stroke oil or regular motor oil over them. But if you do something different or have something you like, go ahead and share that with me in the comments. No, I'm not about to start a yoga class. The reason I'm down here is I wanted to show you a little setup because I'm going to run a test. So this Malossi exhaust seems way louder to me than the Peace Pipe was, and I'm not sure if that's my perception or if that's reality, and here's why. Because the Peace Pipe angles up and out the back of the scooter, and it's well behind my ears. This exhaust, with its U-bend, the typical tuned exhaust system, brings the silencer back up toward the rider, and then it does kind of angle out and down, but the sound may be coming out closer to my ears. So I'm not certain if it's just that or if this exhaust is actually louder. Either way, I can tell you from riding it that it would be way more fatiguing to ride with this exhaust than the Peace Pipe would, just because of the sound level in my right ear. But I've done tests in the past where I check the sound level of the exhaust, and I basically just set this up. I've got a sound meter here. I set that up at a 45-degree angle, 6 feet from my rear tire, and then I check at idle, at 5,000 RPM, and at wide open throttle to figure out what the sound level is, and that way I've got some real data to compare with some other data that I've taken in the past. As you can see, the Peace Pipe actually turned out to be louder than the Malossi exhaust is, especially anywhere that really matters for when you'd be going down the road. But with that said, this style of exhaust that comes around and aims back at the rider still feels way louder to the rider, at least to me it does. So you'd be better off with a rear exit exhaust if you're looking for something that's easy on your ears for long-term cruising or something like that, day-to-day use. Which pretty much with this style of exhaust means you're either going to have something modified with a Penton style muffler like the Peace Pipe has, or you're going to have to buy a drag pipe, which is where instead of this bend here, it goes straight out the back As far as I know, the only real negatives with those are, one, it's going to stick way out there and you might run into it with your shins or something, and possibly more importantly, they aren't always as well supported. They aren't usually as well supported as these style are, so it can cause stress cracks and the mufflers, the exhaust can break over time. But yeah, if you want something comfortable on your ears, maybe go for rear exit exhaust. But the point of this was, it's my perception that this is louder, that the peace pipe actually is the louder of the two exhausts. Another thing that I did while waiting for sliders to arrive, because unfortunately it looks like it's going to take the better part of a week, is I finally put Ride-On in my tires. And just so you know, I'm not sponsored by them or anything. I legitimately have used this stuff for years. And if you don't know what Ride-On is, basically it's a real thick slime. It can act as a tire sealant to help if you get a puncture on the road. But the reason that I really use it is because it can help balance the tire. And then you don't have to use wheel weights. And since I've had these powder-coated wheels, I really haven't wanted to stick on wheel weights on there. And I've had this stuff just sitting around for literally months and have never used it. So I finally got around to putting that in there. It did help to smooth out some of the vibration that I've been feeling in the wheels and tires, but that's not actually why I'm telling you about it right now. The reason that I'm telling you about it is because when I did my last tuning passes, it was on a day that was about 70 to 75 degrees, which is way warmer than normal here in Maryland in March. So the usual weather is about 50 to 60 degrees, somewhere in that range, and it was also more humid that day. So the air was much less oxygen dense than it normally would be. And what happened was, when I took it down the road, because you have to ride for about roughly 5 miles after you put that stuff in there to get it to circulate around the tire, suddenly the scooter ran much better than it did the last time around. It ran about 500 RPM higher, roughly 12,000 RPM when I was wide open throttle versus about 11.5 before, and it felt snappier. And I had changed absolutely nothing. The only difference was the difference in the weather. So when I initially did it, I used the 110 main jet. I went up a little bit from what the peace pipe had. That was way rich. Then I went down to a 105, and that seemed to work well enough, so I stuck with it, because what I've done with this is I've just stayed as rich as I can basically with the mixture, so I don't have to worry about anything with melting a piston, seizures, etc. But even at the time I thought, well, going one step down from that rich to the next jet is it's probably borderline. It's still probably running pretty rich, but I was just going to leave it there. But after seeing this, I'm going to go ahead and try a little smaller main jets. But first, today it's actually 55 degrees. I don't have my sliders in yet, but I am going to go ahead. I'm going to do a test run with the same main jet in there today, just to find out, make sure it wasn't a fluke, and then I'll try smaller main jets and see what happens. Definite improvement from the warm weather test ride, so I'm going to go ahead and try both a 102 and 100 main jet, and then I'll decide from there which one I use. Wasn't much difference between the RPM between the 105, the 102, and the 100 main jets. But there was a difference in how it felt and the responsiveness, at least to my perception. Because by the time I got down to the 100 main jet, when I was trying to pull out of my driveway, just easing into the throttle, once it started to hit the pipe, it started trying to slip the tire, and it hadn't been doing that before. So it definitely felt like it was coming in more aggressive, and I could feel that as well when I did my acceleration pass, that when I went wide open throttle, it seemed like it came in very hard. I did notice an improvement in speed with the 102 and the 100 main jets, doing about 67 miles per hour at around 12,200 RPM with the 105 main jet, and then the 102 and the 100 got to roughly almost 69 miles per hour with me sitting up, with a little bit of a tailwind though, and that was about 12,300 RPM. So for right now, I'm going to stick with a 100 main jet because warmer weather should be coming, and I'm not seeing anything disturbing with the CHT, cylinder head temperatures, so hopefully that'll be okay for now. Here's another quick pipe finish update. Now I've got about 25 miles on this, just shy of 25 miles. You can see the stinger is pretty much totally a deep brown, even going toward black. And again, the header, very, very dark brown, going toward a black. And what I've noticed now is that I've got a flat finish up here, nearest the actual flange, and it looks like the clear coating is actually burning off on there already. And then the second stage diffuser belly and the baffle here, they really haven't changed a whole lot since the last time I showed them to you. So maybe they'll still stay that color for quite a while. But it looks like the areas with a lot of heat, it's probably going to burn off the clear coat. My lighter sliders are due any minute now, so I'm going to go ahead down the road and I'm going to do a set of passes with the current 7-gram sliders. That way I can measure out 0 to 30, 40, 50 mile per hour acceleration runs, and I can see exactly which weights work the best. I made up these small aluminum inserts on the lathe that weigh about 1.5 grams each, and what that will let me do is put those in the 4-gram sliders, and then I can get 5.5 gram out of those, and that will let me check 4.75 or 5.25 gram weights if I want to. As you can see by the chart, I did a bunch of runs with different weights, and I started out with 1 gram increments, and then as I felt I was narrowing it down, I moved to half gram and then ultimately to quarter gram. So what I found was that the heavier weights really weren't letting it get into its peak power at all, the 6 and 7 grams, and then it started picking up, and once I got down to the 5 gram to 4.5 gram range, then I noticed different performance on different parts of the run. So you'll see the 0 to 30s actually didn't really get any better from 6 gram to 4.5 gram, at least on average. I did get some runs. My best run, I believe, was 3.3 seconds, 0 to 30 with some of the lightweights. But on average, they didn't really improve, and I think that would probably require clutch work, or most likely a new clutch, an aftermarket clutch. But then the 4.5 gram are the quickest 0 to 40 by 0.1 second over the 5 and 4.7 grams. But then the 5 and 4.7 gram outperformed the 4.5 grams on 0 to 50. So what I believe was happening was that the 4.5 gram were actually revving out of the power band over where the engine most wants to be, while the other slightly heavier weights were still staying in the power. At that point, I decided I needed more data to make a good decision about which weights I wanted to stick with. So I went back and I noted the RPM at 30, 40, and 50 miles per hour while wide open throttle accelerating for all these runs. And again, this is all averaged of the 4 runs. And what I found was it looked like it wanted to stay somewhere between roughly 13 to 13,500 RPM for the best power, the best performance. This additional information also allowed me to see that RPM was the highest every time from 7 gram to 4.5 gram on every single test on the very first pass. So I rode about 4 to 5 miles usually to get to my little test strip out there. And so that means the scooter engine was warmed up, and the CVT should be fairly warm. But I think what happens is under the acceleration runs, wide open throttle, you put a lot more stress on everything, you get a lot more belt slip, clutch slip, and a lot more heat into the transmission. So I believe that the CVT heated up, and that's why RPM went down with the later runs. And for the most part, the first run would be a higher RPM, and then the last 3 runs were usually much more similar to each other. So what I saw there is that the heavier weights were all quickest on the first run. That's when the RPM was the highest. And then the lighter weights were usually quicker after the first run. And somewhere around 5.25 grams, it sort of leveled out. All runs were fairly close. So that also allowed me to look at the RPM that I was at on the first run versus the last runs. And I could, again, dial in the power band. But again, it showed me that I want to stick somewhere between 13,000 to 13,500 RPM with this combo to get the best results. So at that point, I had it narrowed down to somewhere between the 4.5 and the 5 gram sliders. And I started thinking about what I actually want to do or enjoy doing with the scooter the most to make my decision from there. And the thing that I enjoy the most is usually playing around, going from 0 to 30, 0 to 40, something like that. And I thought the 4.5 grams are great, but if I've just been riding, they're actually going to be a little bit slower if I just take off one time from a stop. Where if I've got the 4.75 or 5 gram sliders in there, they do a little better on the first time I take off. And I'm assuming most of the time that I will be doing any sort of taking off on the street, that I won't be doing it back to back as I did in these tests, because for these tests I literally ran 0 to 50, braked, turned around, and then ran 0 to 50 and repeated that until I had 4 passes done, which is not something you would normally do when you're just riding around. So for that reason, I decided to stick with the 4.75 gram sliders for what I'll actually ride around with. Now that we've got this information, we can compare the performance of the Malossi exhaust to that of the Peace Pipe on the same setup. And by the same setup, I mean I changed the main jet, possibly the idle mixture settings, and I changed the slider weights. And other than that, it remained untouched. No changes anywhere else in the CVT. I didn't swap belts in the middle of anything. Timing stayed the same. It's all the same aside from basically the main jet and the slider weights. The Malossi exhaust got me to 0 to 30, 0.3 seconds quicker than the Peace Pipe. 0.8 seconds quicker by the time I was at 40, and 1.8 seconds quicker to 50 miles per hour. And as you can see, it revved about 2,500 RPM on average higher than the Peace Pipe in order to do this. And I feel that that's probably most of the reason that the Malossi MHR exhaust is outperforming the Peace Pipe. Remember that the Peace Pipe was not at all designed for this kind of stuff. It wasn't designed to rev 13,000 plus RPM. It was designed initially for my 103cc engine, and those things really don't seem to make much power very far past 10,500 RPM. So it was never really designed to rev much above 10,500 RPM. I have faith that if I talked to John and got him to build a Peace Pipe for 13 to 13,500 RPM, you would see a much more similar result. I know a lot of people have spoke negatively about the Peace Pipe in the past, but it is made by a guy that is a lifelong two-stroke tuner guru, and enthusiast. The dude knows what he's talking about. He knows what he's doing. He's an excellent pipe builder. So I hate to see the negative comments about that. He's a really great guy aside from that. And the Peace pipe is a really nice pipe. It's one of the, probably my favorite exhaust that I've ever owned, even including this Malossi exhaust. I just really like the thing. It's kind of unique, one-off, and it was custom made for my setup. So again, the Malossi exhaust is doing very well here, but I think it's because the Malossi exhaust is doing what it's designed for. And that's not to put it down because the thing rips. It really is a lot of fun to ride around that way and just to listen to it scream. But again, that's what it's made for. Where the Peace pipe was made for something much lower revving than this setup. Alright, so now we know that the Malossi exhaust does indeed improve acceleration times versus the Peace pipe on the same setup. But what does that really mean in the real world? How far apart is 1.8 seconds 0 to 50? Is it enough to make it worth the very high revs and a little more high-strung engine? Or is it a negligible difference that you'd hardly even notice? I think these numbers are great to keep track of progress across the project in a way that is repeatable and fairly simple. But I'm really curious to see what those numbers would really mean in the real world if you line these things up next to each other. Meet my brother Brett. So he's here to ride an identical version of T2 that he happens to own, except he has a Peace pipe on his. So I'm going to run mine with the Malossi MHR Big Bore exhaust, and Brett over here is going to be beside me with the Peace pipe. And we're going to find out exactly what it does mean in the real world across about 1/16 of a mile, or 330 feet in a drag race. It looks like the Malossi MHR setup put a gap of about 2 scooter lengths on the Peace pipe setup. And you'll also notice that I have timed out the runs. This was across 330 feet or 1/16 of a mile. And the Malossi did it in 6.4 seconds at 49 miles per hour. And the Peace pipe did it at 7.0 seconds at 46 miles per hour. So not a big discrepancy in the miles per hour across that distance, but about 0.6 of a second quicker for the Malossi exhaust. I've got almost exactly 100 miles on this Malossi exhaust now, so let's take one more look at the finish and what's happening to it. Most obvious thing is up here at the header. You can see it's actually totally burning through, I guess, any of the clear coat on there, and going back to the more natural colors of the pipe and the discoloration from heat and welding. And that's all the way around the header. You can see it goes severely up to about here. Then we transition into black. It's no longer brown anymore. This is totally black, all the way up to about this point where we start getting into deep coffee colors and then into tan and brown. And then once we get to the stinger, again, no more brown tone here. It is totally black all the way around. Silencer still looks good. The only possible issues there is that I've been getting leakage around the inlet of the silencer and right here near the outlet of the silencer as well. I've had some oil leakage there. To me, not really a big deal because this thing spits oil out anyway. It spits oil all over the pipe because I'm running 32:1 premix, so it's putting out plenty of oil and plenty of smoke anyhow. That's not a big deal. That's kind of expected to happen, I would imagine. So yeah, no big complaints, but I was kind of hoping for such an expensive pipe, and all the race pipes are expensive. That's nothing specific about Malossi. That's just how it works with these race pipes. But I was just kind of hoping for this kind of money that you'd get something that held up a little better than this, because it's such a nice looking pipe when you first put it on. And it looks like that's going to change quite a bit over time. That's about it for now, but before I go, I do want to say thanks again to scootertuning.ca for hooking me up with discounts on some of the parts that you've seen on this 86cc build. Also, thank you to you for watching, and please subscribe if you haven't already. Click that bell to make sure you get notifications, and like the video if you enjoyed it or found it helpful. Thank you.